I'm here with Ben Johnson, the voice and brains behind the Perpetual Chess Podcast, one of the most successful podcasts and definitely the most successful chess podcast in history. First, welcome to the show, Ben. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Dylan. Happy to be here.
All right. Well, how does it feel to have the most successful chess podcast in history?
Well, first of all, I don't know if that's true anymore. I gotta give a shout out to the C Square podcast.
There you go.
They're doing a fantastic work, and I always tune into that as well. And I know there's so many good chess podcasts these days. But I mean, I do feel very privileged to get to do this. I enjoy the work so much that I don't even like to take weeks off. You can probably relate to this, given your current project. But I just feel like there's so many stories to be shared in chess, and I'm always excited to hear them.
Yeah, it is quite incredible how many amazing players and just generally how the community has exploded and popularity of chess is at an all-time.
It's interesting when no one was watching, so now that it's a bigger umbrella, all the more. So.
Yeah, so I do want to drill down on the most successful podcast. Let's be more specific. The most prolific. I would say you definitely have the title of the most episodes of any chess podcast. Is that correct?
That's true, although that might be damning with faint praise. It's like, man, you made a lot of episodes. I don't know if anyone was listening, but man, you've got a lot of content out.
Well, okay, but it's a full-time job now, right?
Yes, it is. No, and I'm lucky to have sponsors, and shout out to all the Patreon supporters who help the podcast going. So yeah, it is my full-time job. I used to teach chess as well. I'm not doing any teaching right now. I have a book coming out and now going to work on a chessable course. So I do a bit of content, but 80+% of my professional time is devoted to the podcast. And I'm lucky that some of that time might be just reading a book, but I try to prepare thoroughly for my interviews. And I definitely consider it a dream that I'm getting to sort of learn about chess culture as something that I can call work.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So let's go all the way back to December 2016. Can you walk me through what drove you to start the Perpetual Chess Podcast and set the full scene, please, like where it happened and all that.
Yeah, I can do that for sure. So I was living in Pittsburgh at the time. I'm in my 40s. I've mostly lived in New York in my adult life, but my wife is from Pittsburgh. And when we had our first kid, like a lot of New Yorkers did, we looked around at our small apartment and decided we better get out of there. So we ended up in Pittsburgh, and I was just getting back into the chess world. I've worked in some other fields. I taught chess in my 20s for Chess in the School, is one of the biggest organizations here in the U.S., and then for Sophia Road in New York. But then I got into poker, like a lot of chess players have done, and had some success and played professionally for 7 years. Then I got into financial markets, trying to figure out how to invest my poker winnings, and I spent some years doing that. That didn't go as well as the poker. So eventually, I didn't lose all my money or anything, but at some point I realized I wasn't really generating income. So I then got back into chess and started from basically building my own program, drawing on my prior experiences in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh's reasonably spread out, so I was driving around a lot, just getting reacclimated to the chess world. And I love podcasts as a medium. I have a lot of interests outside of chess and listened to a good range of podcasts even back then. And I just couldn't believe how little there was in the way of chess podcasts. So I had like a file on my phone where I would brainstorm potential guests and ideas, but I'm an introvert by nature, actually. I think it's true of a lot of chess players, but even a lot of sort of outward facing content creators, like they can sit in front of a microphone and talk, but in the real world, they're rather quiet. And that's how I am as well. So I had this idea kicking around for a year, and, we had a baby at home. We had a lot going on. So I wasn't sure if I was going to do it, but finally I just, I talked to my wife. It was a financial investment to get it started, time investment when we didn't have a lot of time. And finally I just decided, okay, I'm going to do this for 6 months and see if there's interest in it. It helped that I grew up in Philadelphia and went to school with Gregory Shahade and Jennifer Shahade, and had a few other prominent friends in the chess world. Mike Klein from chess.com is my former roommate from when we worked at Chess in the Schools. And I had randomly become friends with Grandmaster Jan Gustafsson from when he visited New York, visited Greg Shahade and friends some years ago. I'm Ben Feingold, as he's discussed in a couple of his interviews with me, he briefly lived in Brooklyn, so we became friendly. So I had a handful of friends in the chess world and just decided to give it a go.
Man, that's really incredible. I mean, one thing that continually blows me away when I do these interviews is how small the chess community is and how interconnected the East Coast community is.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I always feel I try not to be like East Coast biased as they talk about with media, but I have to admit I do have more connections on the East Coast.
Right.
So, I've been lucky to get to talk with people like Jay Stallings and Kostya Kovyutsky, who I know you're friendly with.
Right.
And Jesse, the whole Bay Area crew, Jesse Cry and Vinay Bhatt and David Bruce. So I have gotten to know some of the West Coast people, but I definitely don't feel as interconnected.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I also want to go back to what you said about being an introvert, because this is a common theme I've seen in chess media. Like you said with Kostya Kovyutsky, he called streaming a parasocial activity. I think that also applies to podcasting. And then also Eric Rosen himself said that he was not a natural public speaker until he got into streaming. So, what about this activity has brought out your, I guess, public persona?
Yeah, well, it's just a different feeling. I mean, you don't see the thousands of people that are tuning in or downloading the episode, and there's sort of a forced focused. There's almost, to me, it feels like, I mean, chess players obviously are many drawn to more than one game. As I mentioned, I have a background in poker, and there's something contained about the idea of like sitting, for me, I mean, obviously other people are creating content in other realms, but I think it's true for that as well. Like whether you're making a chess YouTube video or engaging in a one-on-one conversation, there's something sort of bite-sized in what you're trying to achieve, where a chess player's training of trying to optimize that one thing, I think can carry over reasonably well. Whereas if you're like at a party, that feeling where you're in a room full of people and you don't have a friend there, like that's totally overwhelming and it's not bite-sized, So I think there's sort of, because you're at home and because you still have some control over your environment, I think that there's a natural way to sort of slowly build up your skills.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And so going back to that first 6 months that you were talking about, because that's very interesting. Were there moments where, expanding your own personal skills bumped up against that introverted nature?
Well, this is still true to an extent, but the biggest challenge in the first 6 months, I would say, is listening to my own interviews was, I mean, I still consider it painful.
Yeah.
I do it every week in preparation, but it was all the more painful hearing all the ums and the ahs and the wows and, all these what they call filler words, which when I listen to someone like Grandmaster Maurice Ashley, he's just so polished. It's really impressive. And obviously, if you look outside the chess media world, there's plenty of professionals who are really impressive in that fashion. But for me, that was quite a challenge in the first 6 months. And I still wish I were better, but I try to get, tiny bit better every week.
Yeah, what did you do in that first 6 months to improve?
Well, the biggest advice that they give to improve is just to slow down. They say, a lot of it is you have this fear of dead air with interviewing and podcasts in particular.
Right.
And actually, a pause can cause someone to elaborate more than a follow-up question can, and that listeners don't mind. Conversely, if you're the one that ends up talking next, listeners don't mind if you take a second to gather your thoughts. Obviously, these days with technology, you can also sort of use the software that like shortens pauses automatically, but it makes for a better conversation if you just let the conversation breathe for a second, rather than just like instantly feel like you need to be emitting some type of noise even when you don't know what you're going to say.
Well, I feel like we need a pause now. Sorry, that's super awkward.
Yeah, it'll work. I'll start talking.
Right. Okay, so the first 6 months of Perpetual Chess was a hobby. How did you find time? Did you have kids that then first? I guess.
Yeah, so I have 2 kids now who are 7 and 10, and we just had one at the time.
Wow.
Or no, my daughter. Sorry, Margot, for getting the timeline wrong. She was just born around that time.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a lot, but at the time I didn't prepare as thoroughly. It was a handful of hours a week. And again, my wife was supportive. If you're a freelance chess teacher, you're probably not going to be getting rich But part of my motivation from a professional perspective is there are certain hours that are very easy to fill. After school chess hours and even evenings if you're doing private lessons and weekends. But the hours where kids are at school and adults are traditionally working are more challenging to fill. And so once my kids were going to daycare and stuff like that, like you want some sort of project to work on. So I also, by using that time, I was able to devote some time to it right from the beginning.
That's excellent. So then what was the moment when... No, actually, let's go to after that, the first 6 months. So after 6 months, what did you do? Like, what was happening?
It's just grown slowly and steadily over the years. So nothing changed significantly in 6 months, although it was probably, I wasn't making any money for the first 6 months. And it was probably around that time where I launched a Patreon page before I had any corporate sponsors. Excuse me. Before I had any corporate sponsors.
Sure.
And that gave me enough sort of runway to say, okay, I'm at least making a little bit of money doing this. So I'm super grateful to the early supporters and the fact even that people were listening at the beginning, because I was interested in it from a personal perspective. I love hearing chess stories. So that was part of my motivation for starting the podcast. And it was reassuring to discover quickly that there were at least some people who felt the same way.
Excellent. And then you mentioned corporate sponsorship here, so that's a good follow-up. When did you get your first corporate sponsor?
I might have had one or two one-off ads previous to working with Chessable, so okay. I apologize if I'm forgetting a company, but I often say that Chessable, I sort of feel like we grew up together. And to take it a step further, they're like, they're like your much more successful sibling, But I mean, I interviewed David Cramley, their co-founder, John Bartholomew, who was also a co-founder, is also someone that I'd met once even before I'd started Perpetual Chess. So I'd seen their evolution, and they've been really supportive of the podcast from the early days. Geert Vanderveld, their current CEO, was like a listener to Perpetual Chess before he started to sort of network within the chess world and before it became a profession for him. So they've been really generous, and once they started regularly supporting the show, it definitely that was one of the key contributors to my eventually being able to do this full time.
So would you say that you were at the right place at the right time, or the right airwaves at the right time?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that I had first mover advantage in the chess podcast space. There was one shout out. There's this podcast called Full English Breakfast that is now defunct. That Simon Williams and Lawrence Trent and Macaulay Peterson, and Grandmaster Stephen Gordon occasionally did, dating back to like some years before Perpetual Chess. But it was dormant at the time I started, and it was only one, and it was a different format. It was like friends kind of kicking it, talking about chess news, whereas I listened to a lot of interview podcasts in different fields, and there was no, that I knew of at least, chess interview podcast.
Okay, and then how did the chess boom of 2020, basically, the Queen's Gambit boom, basically, affect your podcast?
I mean, honestly, it didn't change my life that much. It was just that the numbers were suddenly a lot bigger, and I did get more emails and stuff like that. I would say at its peak, like my listenership probably doubled, but honestly, if you compare it to someone like Levi Rosman or, the numbers that chess.com made public, it didn't filter through all that much, but
right.
certainly it helped. And I got more air quote newbie questions in that period. But I've come to terms with the fact that Perpetual Chess, and I enjoy this about it, but it's really for the hardcore chess fans,
Right.
like, someone who develops a casual interest in chess may look for chess podcasts and may discover it. And I try to be as accessible as I can be, but you're really kind of being thrown in the deep end. You're not talking about sort of basic strategies of chess. And obviously most people who take a new interest in the game are first and foremost interested by the strategic elements of the game itself. And that makes it not like a natural fit for the podcast. Now, obviously I do talk some chess improvement, especially in the Adult Improver series, but a lot of what I interview people about is what we would call more like chess culture.
Right.
And in that case, if I'm asking like Ulf Anderson about like, his most memorable win, if if you just learn what a fork is, you don't fully appreciate the legacy.
Right.
Although some people, and I actually have this perspective when I get interested in a new subject, I love to just listen to something that's like way deep in the weeds. So you do occasionally get that kind of fan. But anyway, the chess boom itself, like I feel like people who got into chess and the chess boom, they may start listening to Perpetual Chess like 3 years in, like
Right.
it may take a while.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so let's go to the hardcore chess fans, because obviously that's what I am.
Yeah.
What would you say, or who would you say are the main um, forefathers and foremothers of chess in America? Tough
Like
question. Yeah,
modern or historically?
like historically first. Let's start historically.
Okay. I mean, well, I guess you have to start for better or for worse with Bobby Fischer.
Yeah.
Obviously, he has a tremendous legacy, some of it positive, a lot of it negative,
Hmm.
unfortunately, but definitely the biggest household name in chess. I mean, and then there's a massive drop from Fischer to anyone else.
Right.
And I mean, I feel like everyone in a sense is his spawn, but the first name that I think of beyond him is someone like Bruce Pandolfini, who made so many accessible books,
Right.
and is a great representative for chess, great storyteller. And obviously at the grassroots level, there's so many teachers make a difference in people's lives and often are unsung heroes. But at the public level, historically, I feel like it was Fischer and not much else until this more recent explosion.
Okay, I actually do want to talk about Fischer's complicated legacy. I think it's important for the public to know his chess genius and his dysfunction as a person. What would you say is why do you say that his legacy is complicated?
Yeah, well, his legacy is complicated because a lot of the things, Fischer's legacy is complicated because a lot of the things that he said are embarrassing to a chess player.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that I've gotten to interview two of probably his most accomplished or most prominent and most knowledgeable biographers. I am John Donaldson, and Dr. Frank Brady,
Oh,
and
awesome.
have read his biographies. I mean, I'd actually already read some of Brady's works, but have read them in preparation for those interviews. And, it's just so opinions differ about whether he was just eccentric in his early, teens and early 20s, or whether there were signs of mental illness already there. But it's pretty unequivocal that he did not react to fame well,
Hmm.
and he did not have the best influences, and obviously turned out to make reprehensible anti-Semitic and sexist,
Yeah.
misogynist statements. And it's quite unfortunate that a lot of people, like he had these comments after 9/11.
Right.
So a lot of people, that might be one of the first things they think of, especially here in the U.S. when they think of chess, at least prior, again, to these past 5 to 10 years.
This might be a question of can you separate the artist from the art, but is it possible to separate his reprehensible comments from his chess games?
Uh, for me, it is. And in a sense, it's easier with chess than other domains. If you think of something like a Woody Allen film, obviously he's had checkered history. And prior to that becoming public, I was a fan of his movies. And now I just feel like I can't watch them. But that's because when you create art like a film, it feels more intertwined. The other thing is, I wouldn't buy one of Fischer's, well, I mean, obviously he's passed away, so he's not even the one that would financially benefit if you were to buy his book.
Right.
But he's not an artist in the sense where you're commercially supporting his work by playing through his games. So I feel like you can just play through his games and appreciate his genius as a chess player. And luckily, there's not this like negative negative effect where you're supporting him by doing it. You're just
Right.
appreciating it, at least in my opinion.
Oh, that's a really interesting distinction, actually. I appreciate that. What about in education? You mentioned Pandolfini. Are there any other personalities that you've interviewed that stick out as far as like the progenitors of chess education in America?
Well, Jay Stallings, who I'm guessing does great work in
Yeah, good review.
California.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm old friends with Elizabeth Spiegel, who is just a legend here. She was featured in the movie Brooklyn Castle, and when I worked at Chess in the Schools, she was one of the teacher trainers. She had already been there, so I attended her, sat in observing how she taught at her classes in the early 2000s. And I know that there's many from other parts of the U.S. as well, but I'm mainly in that New York vortex where like there's a lot of Chess in the Schools. Great teachers who've built great legacies.
Excellent. And going back, let's go to a little bit more modern. What American players would make your shortlist for your favorite interviews?
Well, Fabiano Caruana is endlessly fascinating, and it's funny because it took me a long time to get to interview him, so it's been interesting to see his evolution. So I only got to interview him in 2022, and actually it was within a month after I interviewed him that C Squared podcast appeared. So
wow.
I haven't talked to him personally about it, but obviously in hindsight, at that time, he knew that he and Grandmaster Christian Carrillo were going to launch this project, and I had arranged that through the St. Louis Chess Club. I don't have a direct line to Fabiano. I had tried once before to reach out to him. But it's funny that in hindsight, obviously, he agreed to do it, sort of getting warmed up for his own podcast. But he's another one who, if you watch him, if you trace his career and sort of see him in public, he's clearly an introvert, but you wouldn't expect that he's so forthcoming and open. And obviously he's a brilliant guy, but he's also really good at making the ideas that he explains accessible. So someone like Fabiano, but there's also so many American legends from prior generations. I just interviewed Grandmaster Gregory Cardano for the second time, obviously Soviet born, but has been living in the US for decades. And he's just such a down-to-earth, worldly, curious person, very modest, but just tons of insights to share. And if you give me a minute, I'm sure I can think of
no worries.
Many more.
We can pull on that thread because in the United States of chess, the immigrant community in America is featured heavily. Because obviously a lot of players from Eastern Europe, a lot of players from India, a lot of players from China. There's players from all over the world in America, and how maybe you can just elaborate on how you see the immigrant community impacting chess in America.
Yeah, well, regular listeners may have picked up on this, so it's funny that you mentioned the immigrant community in this interview, because to me that's like the most fascinating and one of my favorite things about chess is this sort of connective tissue across borders, and I'm really drawn to this idea that you might be born under difficult circumstances, you might be born in a political system you don't agree with, and a lot of people may have that happen and they kind of have no way out, especially looking back at the old Soviet regime. You're not allowed to really leave the country. So how would you even dream of getting out of there? Yeah. But these Soviet era players, they are permitted to travel in order to compete, and then they start to get a glimpse of the world. Genna Sosonko, Grandmaster Genna Sosonko, who emigrated from the Soviet Union to the Netherlands, is one of my favorite writers, and he tells these stories in his books of like passing the Gulag Archipelago to like another Soviet player, when he sees them after he'd emigrated. And, like I interviewed Grandmaster Hort from the Czech Republic, and he told this amazing story of like he was coming back from an interzonal in Tunisia, and he didn't want to go back, and he had set up like a code in advance to try to, because he told his family, I'm hoping not to go back, but I don't know what's going to happen. So he told the story of like putting, I think it was $200 in his passport when he handed it to the German agent, like hoping that he would just let him through, and that he let him through. And then whenever they do make it to a new country, it's always the chess connections that are able to help them get acclimated. Like Grandmaster Kaidanov, who I mentioned, has some legendary stories about like coming to the US and getting robbed when he first came to New York, but then he met a chess friend from Kentucky, and he said, so helped him set up with a few students to make a bit of money. And, before you know it, he's one of the most, respected and successful trainers in the US. And so many of these stories just start with like, one or two chess players who let you sleep on the couch,
right.
Until you get situated. So there's been, that's one of my favorite things about chess.
What kind of a privilege is it to interview these kind of players?
Yeah, it's amazing. I really have to pinch myself, and 6-7 years in, I still have a strong case of imposter syndrome when I'm sitting there with them.
Right. Right. Well, let's take a moment to go back and review your early chess career and when you started playing chess. Just because I love to hear the early childhood stories. It's something that's a little bit neglected in chess media. So yeah, when did you start playing, and how did your chess playing progress?
So I learned to play when I was 6. My family was visiting another family's vacation house, and they had a chess set, and they had a kid who was a couple years older than me who taught me how to play, and I loved it right away. I was just immediately sucked in to this game. But no one in my family played chess. I didn't know about the chess world at all. So when we went back to our own house, I could rarely find anyone to play, although certainly whenever I could, I would. But I didn't know that chess books were a thing. Like I didn't know the first thing, so I didn't really play at all, like seriously, until I was 12.
Okay.
When there was a school, I went to the Masterman School, which has a successful chess program to this day,
Wow.
and there was a nascent chess program there.
Is that in New York City?
It's in Philadelphia,
Oh, Phil, it's in
Pennsylvania.
Philly. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
that's where you grew up in Philly, right?
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, kids were playing chess during lunch, and they had the like tournament chess set, with the vinyl board. I had only seen the sort of wooden ones with the funky figurines before that, or the like pressman chessmen. So already I was like, wow, that looks so nice. So I started playing with them. They told me when to go to the club, and so I started playing competitive chess when I was 12, and started going to tournaments from there. And there was enough infrastructure in place where I was competing regularly and made a lot of my friends at school were in the chess club, and just blossomed from there.
Not to date you, would this be in the 90s?
Yeah, so I'm born in 1977, so starting in 1989
Okay.
was.
So playing chess in the 90s, what were you guys inspired by then?
It was a fascinating scene. There's this book, Winning the World Open, that came out recently by Harold Scott and Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, sort of detailing these. And they talk about this era, but there were a lot of smoky halls and Russian speaking at tournaments. I actually ended up studying Russian
Right.
in college. It was because I heard it so much at chess tournaments that
Oh,
I
wow.
needed to fulfill a language requirement. And I said, I want to know what they're saying. So it was definitely more carefree vibe. I have a chapter in my upcoming book called We're All Professionals Now. Basically, it feels like everything in all walks of life is kind of being optimized. If you think about the way that travel teams have taken over youth sports and stuff like that, I'm not saying it's strictly a good thing by any means, but that's sort of just the way the wind is blowing. People try to get better at things sooner, possibly to the detriment of sort of just going from one activity to another and enjoying yourself. And
Right.
that has certainly been the arc in chess. I mean, you used to see grandmasters at the bar 5 minutes before the game. You might have them running to get drinks during the game, showing up late, stepping out for smoke breaks, like just so much. And that was the professionals, let alone the amateurs.
Right.
Whereas now it's like everyone's meditating before the games and making sure they get their 8 hours of sleep with their, fitness bands. And obviously, don't even get me started on all of the like amazing kid chess players that you need to compete with to play. Obviously, kids were still playing, but someone like Grandmaster Ben Feingold has talked about how it used to be maybe 25% of the people in the field of a big open tournament were kids. And now it feels like it's more like 65, 70%,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Maybe that's a quick detour before we get to how you became a national master, to talk about the change in chess from, the 80s, 90s, when there were no computers, to now when computers dominate the scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously changed everything. I mean, the thing is, in the 1990s, there were amazing players, but we were all kind of just guessing
Yeah.
at how to get better.
Yeah.
And I feel like people didn't even talk about solving tactics that much at that point. Now we have Puzzle Rush, we have, calculation work. But at the time, you played and you tried to get your hands on some chess books and you looked at the games. And those are still core tenets of getting better at chess. But like if you were studying an opening back in those days, you were basically trying to figure it out for
Yeah.
yourself. Even if you had a book, they weren't. The quality of books now is so much better than it was then. So even if you had an opening book, there would be so much left unsaid that you would be trying to figure it out on your own. Or if you knew a stronger player, you'd be asking them, you'd be trying to figure it out from your postmortems. Whereas now the answers are always at hand. And obviously, as we talk about the younger generation, that contributes to their incredible growth.
Have you interviewed any grandmasters that talk about that kind of secret grandmaster knowledge that existed back then?
Yeah, one memorable one is Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky. He also, um, speaking of great emigration stories, I mean, he had an engineering background and came to New Jersey and actually worked in like I think it was a plastics company for a few months, but then he started to win tournaments and just got better and better. But he's talked about, and it's come up repeatedly because I've interviewed a lot of Soviet era players about this idea of chess culture,
Yeah.
and he's sort of pushed back against the idea. They talk about the Soviet chess school, and
Right.
he said that there really was no Soviet chess school. What it was is there's chess players everywhere, and there's institutional support for trainers. So he's saying it's not like they were given these secret lessons. It's just that they were spending all this time and they were in an environment supportive of chess, and they
Right.
had found their sort of fellow chess lovers.
Oh.
So it wasn't like a secret curriculum or anything like that, even when it comes to endgames, which of course Russians are at least historically well known for.
Yeah, because all the top players around the world knew what it took to become good, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they were just, I don't know, I might push back on that a little bit. I
Okay.
mean, yeah, when I interview older generation players, Bobby Fischer has this famous quote, I just got good.
Uh-huh.
He made one of the most historic leaps of all time from something like 1600 to 2400 in 2 years, and obviously ascended further from there. But he spent his life immersed in chess and he got better. And Fischer is obviously an extreme case, someone walking down the street with a pocket chess set, bumping into people because he's like looking at chess 24 hours a day. Not everyone is going to be that obsessive, but I've noticed because when I started Perpetual Chess, I'm like you, interested in hearing people's stories. And I'd like to know how to get better at chess too, but it wasn't like my primary motivation for starting the podcast. But as I've become aware that that's something that people are interested in, I try to focus on it more. And I feel like a lot of the grandmasters, they dance around the fact of how easily it came to them. So it's not that they didn't work hard, but it's that what they were doing was not necessarily feeling like work. They're young, they have a lot of neuroplasticity, they discover that they love this game, they compete frequently.
Right.
And, someone like Magnus Carlsen obviously was like a voracious reader. Some were, some weren't. Someone like Hikaru Nakamura preferred to just play online. But the bottom line is they're able, most of them, not all, of course, but they're able to just sort of pursue chess organically and get better without necessarily having some sort of regimented curriculum, which I think, if you look at some of the top young talents, someone like Abhimanyu Mishra today, I think maybe to a lesser extent, some of the younger talents like Pragananda, they're much more serious about it from a younger age than the great players that preceded them.
Right, right. This is the perfect time then to talk about Mishra and some of the other top prodigies. I want to start focus on the U.S. for a second. One of the questions I had for you before this interview is that why is it so hard for prodigies in the U.S. to gain funding and support?
Yeah. So why is it so hard for them to gain funding? Well, first of all, it's great what 1,000 GMs is doing. It's much needed. And I've observed that in developed countries, it seems harder to support top young chess talents than undeveloped countries, which I think is a bit counterintuitive.
Oh, wow.
But places like India, maybe to a lesser extent, Uzbekistan, I think that people notice early on that it's tough to find upward mobility socially. And chess, if you become elite at it, obviously we want there to be more chess professionals than there are, and we want a sort of broader ecosystem than something where only the top 30 players can really support themselves by competing.
Right.
But nonetheless, it is something where if you show an early talent from it, a parent or a sort of motivated kid can notice that it can change your life. Whereas in chess, here in a place like the United States, it's almost like you're giving, I hate to say it, but it's almost like you're giving up professional opportunity by pursuing chess, especially when you reach the age of like the teenage years. If I was, lucky enough to interview Grandmaster Andrew Tang, famously known as the Penguin GM,
Right.
legendary bullet player. He's kind of a good example because obviously he's a great player, Grandmaster, 25, 50, or whatever he is, and just absolutely breathtaking at the faster forms of chess, at bullet chess. But here's a guy who managed, did well enough in school to go to Princeton University, did well at Princeton. Obviously, I'm sure recruiters, hirers notice that he's got a mind that works very fast.
Right.
And now he's going to work at a hedge fund in New York City. So it's hard to, there aren't opportunities like that for a lot of kids in different countries. So I think, but it's unfortunate because it creates a sort of imbalance, inequality of opportunity where if you're younger and you don't have a chance to compete and sort of pursue chess on equal footing, you can sort of fall behind in chess just like you can in the rest of the world. Whereas in theory, chess is a pure meritocracy.
Right. Well, that is very interesting. So then I think what you're saying, if I can just try to synthesize that, is that because of the lack of professional opportunity in chess, and it's obviously changing and developing, but because of that lack of opportunity, chess in America is seen as like a key into better and more lucrative positions or professions.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, it's like a notch on your resume,
right.
Especially, I think prior, like getting into college, obviously, if you can when I was a kid, becoming a master definitely helped me get into the colleges that I did. Now it may be you need to be an IM or a GM. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think when you get to university in the United States, it's hard to prioritize chess and studies at the same time, and there's enough opportunity where if you're being cold-hearted about it, you have to really want it to pursue chess.
Right. And Abhimanyu Mishra is a big focus in the United States of chess, the documentary. So let's talk a little bit more about him, because him and Hemant and their mother are really focused on Mishra becoming world champion. This is like their one big goal in life. What do you see as the road for them to do that? Do you see that road for them?
Yeah, it's hard to say if basically any one person is always going to be an underdog to be world champion.
Yeah.
Even someone like Ali Reza Firouzja, 21 years old, number 2 or number 3 in the world.
Right.
If you were to make an even money bet, it's hard to know, especially when you consider that he's 21 and he's recently expressed some interest in some other fields, which I think is totally natural and normal. So it seems like they're doing, if your goal is to become world champion, it seems like they've got a very professional approach, and obviously they've had tremendous success. But it's still, there's many cases of prodigies like Wei Yi, who reach the near top and might be on a trajectory where they seem like they're going to be world champions, but then they just stall out at some point. And if you love chess enough, that's totally fine, because it's more viable to make a living at chess without being a, say, top 20 player in the world than it has been before. Mm-hmm. But often at that point, different skill sets are needed. You might need like an analytical or presentation skill set, depending on if you're going to be like making courses or teaching or doing streaming. So there are more sort of fallbacks in chess than there used to be, right. But it's always a immensely steep mountain to count on being a top 10 player.
Right. And Mishra is one of the highest rated juniors for his age in the world. Do you think it is possible for him to break Magnus's record as youngest world champion?
It's certainly possible. Yeah. Again, if you offer me an even money bet, no matter who it is, you probably should bet against them. But again, he's doing everything right. If anyone's going to do it, it would be someone with such a professional approach.
You're saying professional approach, but can you just break it down a little bit more, what that approach is for them?
Well, I've been meaning to read their book. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but I have watched a couple of interviews, and they've just been studying chess 8 to 10 hours a day for, years. And obviously opening knowledge is off the charts. They've worked with, top coaches, traveling, doing whatever it takes to compete regularly. I guess I shouldn't say for sure that they're doing everything right, because, there's this book called Range by David Epstein, where he looks at like, top performers across different fields, and actually uses Roger Federer as an example of someone who did not play tennis predominantly as a kid. He played many different sports. So for every specialist, you can find a generalist. And I don't feel like it's settled in chess that the way to, like, if you, Magnus had other interests from being a kid, seemed to pursue chess more organically, again, than today's younger generation does, where they my impression from the outside looking in is that they're pretty regimented about how they approach it, like X number of hours on openings, X number of hours solving, X number of tournaments.
Right.
So to the extent, so I'm saying, I feel like my outsider's perspective is that they're making the most of their chess time, but I don't feel like anyone really knows if you're trying to optimize a Prodigy's potential, if it actually is best to do chess 12 hours a day, or is it better to do it 6 hours a day, have them run around for 2 hours and have them sort of take their mind off things for, doing a few other activities as well.
Right. Was it Augustine, was he the trainer of, who's Magnus's early trainer?
Oh, Seaman Agdestein. I recently got to interview him. Fascinating guy.
Incredible interview, by the way. And he mentioned something about Carlsen shortly doing lessons with Kasparov. And Carlsen not actually doing the work that Kasparov was demanding of him.
Right. Just a legendary story. Yeah. So, yeah.
Can you recount that real quick? Because that's just really hilarious, honestly.
Yeah. And it captures so much, about sort of the essence of Magnus. So, so the story is, Magnus was, Seaman Agdestein, who wrote a book, called I think it's how Magnus Carlsen became the youngest grandmaster in the world. I'm actually not sure about the title because they changed it at some point, but a lot of it is just going through his games as a kid. But there are some fun stories about sort of his development. And what comes across in the book, and having watched a couple other of Seaman's interviews and then getting to talk to him, is that Magnus had a very sort of carefree approach. And he did love chess, but again, he pursued it. And also, Henrik Carlsen wrote the foreword to a book called Chess Improvement. It's all in the mindset, where he has a quote where he says something like, Magnus's mom and I mainly looked at our goal as to not get in the way of Magnus's pure passion for chess. We just didn't, first do no harm. We just didn't want to obstruct it. So, Magnus was a top talent, and Agdestein says that, like, you couldn't miss how incredibly talented he was. He would just pick up a book, glance through a game, and then if you ask him about the game a month later, he can recite all the moves, like that, that sort of thing, that no one else has that ability. But
Bobby Fischer level memory, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Bobby Fischer level of passion.
Right.
But so as he's developing, he's one of the top young talents in the world, and they bring in Kasparov as a coach, sort of, it got a lot of press at the time, big story. And Kasparov comes in and says, I want you to take 4 of your worst losses and annotate them in painstaking detail, and then we'll go over them together. And this is Magnus, he must have been like 17 or something at the time, and he was like, you know what, I'm good. I don't need to do that. So it's just amazing to me that, this is Kasparov. This is the biggest legend in chess history, saying, I'm the one at the hilltop. I'm telling you what to do. This is the key to unlock your potential. And so first of all, it's amazing. Like, my son doesn't like going to school. A lot of kids, like, they might not naturally want to do something that an adult tells you to do. But so it's like the parlay, the combined, Magnus is like headstrong enough and confident in his own abilities enough to say no, but also that, like, his coach and, Seaman Agdestein and the Carlsens, his parents, they all give him support. They all say, okay, Magnus said he doesn't want to see you, Kasparov, but thanks for coming.
It's so ridiculous. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I want to double check. Do you have time to go another 15, 20 minutes? Okay, perfect. Okay. So yeah, I guess what you're saying is that it's just really hard to know what it takes to unlock chess genius. Is that? Yeah.
We basically have no idea.
Yeah. As humans. But as computers, we know a little bit, right?
Yeah. Although even that, like, it's interesting to watch its evolution. If you compare how Stockfish developed, the sort of brute force, we're going to have it solve everything, to the neural nets. To have, like, I'm going to learn by playing. It sort of mirrors the discussion we've been having about how humans approach chess. Someone like Hikaru and Magnus, each in their own way, sort of had the neural net approach where they're just going to cast a wide net, spend a lot of time on chess, but sort of just do what interests them.
Right. Playing Queen H5.
Right, exactly. Yeah, against the Sicilian. Yeah. Whereas some of these younger talents, it feels more like a brute force stockfish type approach, where you just say, okay, I'm going to make the most of every moment.
Right. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about computer chess, and then we can transition into cheating. So I like what you're saying about the neural nets. Can you elaborate for a non-chess player what a neural net is and how it impacts chess? Or how it impacted chess?
Yeah, so what a neural net is, I am not a computer scientist. I have been lucky to interview some experts of the field, most notably Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, who's incredibly insightful on these topics. But basically, neural nets learn experientially. You teach them the rules of a game. And of course, there's this documentary called AlphaGo about how the same thing happened in the game Go, where you teach it the rules, and then you just have it iterate by playing against itself. So rather than giving it sort of a set number of rules, where with something like Stockfish they might say, okay, a bishop's worth 3.25 points, a knight's worth 3, an open file's worth 0.2, an isolated pawn subtract 0.3. I'm obviously just making these more recent numbers
that's how brute force Stockfish works, right?
Yeah, that's how a Stockfish or something works. Whereas the neural nets, they just play infinite number of games and develop their own framework for how to play, and shockingly they're generally a few years ago, they weren't as good at tactics as the brute force ones that are sort of optimized for tactics, but they developed this sort of harmonious, sort of, I guess you could call it, natural style where they are willing to sacrifice material and really are focused on the freedom of the pieces, and amazingly are the best chess players in the world, along with the brute force engines like Stockfish.
Okay, then I have to ask you about Sadler, though. You mentioned Sadler. What was there anything that shocked you about how chess engines work through your interview with Sadler?
Well, one thing he said that blew me away, and I may be off by 100 points or 200 points, but he said in working with Leela, which is one of the most prominent neural nets. So Google, of course, had the famous one called Alpha Zero, that got a lot of headlines that they kept in the lab until they published papers about it. But now Leela is an open source one that many people are working on that's basically just as strong, or because time has passed, even stronger than Alpha Zero was. But he said basically he turned the calculation function off in Leela just in playing with it and evaluated the quality of its play. And he said it could play at a 2600 level, looking no more than 2 moves ahead.
Wow.
Again, so I might be off, I may have a minor detail off of what I'm saying, but that was the gist of what he was saying. And that to me just really underscored just how little us humans know about chess and how much scope there is for continued knowledge, because to only look to, you think of chess so much about being able to see in the future. When someone learns that you play chess, they'll often ask you how many moves ahead can you see? People are very impressed by playing blindfold games, which of course are impressive, but the idea that you can reach grandmaster level just by being perfect about where to put the pieces without breaking a sweat, basically, just boggled my mind and gives me hope, because as a 40-something adult who in theory would like to get better at chess, it's very, very hard to improve your ability to calculate, to see many moves ahead. But I'm like, hey, if this computer can be at 2600 only seeing 2 moves ahead, maybe I can somehow learn a few things and just give me 50 points. I don't need to be a grandmaster.
Oh man, wow, that's really interesting. So basically Sadler proved what grandmasters have been saying all along, that they only think a few moves ahead.
Yeah, they just know which moves to think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe that's a small side detour here, though, between the amateur and the professional. That the professional is only considering a certain limited number of moves in a position, and the amateur is probably thinking about way too many moves, and they have trouble, paring down their candidate moves.
Yeah. I mean, so much of it comes down to pattern recognition. So I think they're able to own in on the best choices quickly. So they may actually still be considering a wide array of moves. It's just their pruning, as they call it with the engines, is so much faster.
Right.
Whereas someone less experienced has to really look at every move, because they don't just naturally know which ones are not likely to be good.
Yeah, okay. So then let's move on to cheating then, especially since it does relate to the engines. So we had this huge cheating scandal with Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen. Magnus leaving a tournament and accusing Hans of basically, in a very strange way, actually through a tweet of cheating. Have you interviewed any of the players involving that?
So the cheating scandal is fascinating. I interviewed Hans Niemann, but it was before the cheating
Oh
scandal.
wow,
So it
really
was
interesting still.
yeah. So I interviewed him in March, and I think the cheating scandal broke like, 6 months after that, if I remember
Wow.
correctly. But I actually went back and listened to it after, just sort of trying to, is this a criminal mastermind that I interviewed, or is this like just a sort of carefree kid who made a few bad choices, and try to
Right.
sort of dissect that. But I'm sorry, I forgot your exact question.
No, no, no. We can even keep going with that because I was actually going to follow up. What did you learn about Hans? Even, I mean, because you must have had some kind of insight into Hans even before, the media was starting to report on the cheating scandal.
Yeah. So of course it's come out that he, I don't even know if we still have to say allegedly, but just in case we'll say
Yeah,
allegedly,
yeah,
cheated online.
right.
It's well known at this point, and they said it was an open secret in the chess world. At the time I interviewed him, I actually didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course he was sponsored by Play Magnus at the time. It was before Play Magnus and Chess.com had merged.
Oh
So,
wow.
you have to assume that they didn't all know that as well. But he did have a reputation of being like a sort of cocky, brash kid. You might hear some stories about him being slightly disrespectful to other professionals, stuff like that. And it comes across in our interview that he's not lacking for confidence, but he's also clearly very driven, putting in tons of hours. As we record this in early September 2023. He's just gotten back into streaming, but at the time he had developed a following streaming, and then actually
Yeah.
to the point where it looked like it could be like a good source of income, which was rare for someone of his age. But he had actually given that up to just study chess 8 to 10 hours a day, and he just described this intense work ethic. And obviously, he made this massive jump around the time that I interviewed him, gaining hundreds of points in a few years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to me, his work ethic, I understood why his personality might be off-putting to some people, but his work ethic seemed legitimate to me.
Okay, and then once the scandal broke, we saw all kinds of ridiculous things, like media reporting, using devices inside of his body and things like that, in very comical ways, but also it captured the attention of the national media. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a fascinating story, and I think it was Grandmaster Jonathan Rowson who wrote very eloquently, and I got to interview him about around the time of that controversy, where he described it as prismatic. He said the reason that it's fascinating is because you look at this little thing and it has all kinds of broader implications. And to me, what it really cast a light on is that historically, you could you might be worried about cheating if people are doing suspicious things,
Yeah.
if people are repeatedly leaving the board, if you have earphones in. But we have now sort of crossed the Rubicon where apparently we're at a moment where someone can be sitting there across from you, never get up from the board, not have anything in their ears, and you're still worried that they could be getting assistance in some way. And that obviously presents a big challenge to the chess world, which I don't feel like we have all the way sorted. So I think that's why that, and of course the headline of anal beads are what
Yeah.
captivated the world.
The anal bead thing. Who started that?
I think John Oliver might have been one of the first people. I'm not.
That's
I'm not
hilarious.
sure.
And then
Yeah.
Hikaru started talking about it on his.
Oh, actually, sorry. It started on a Chess Bra stream.
Okay.
Eric Hansen was reading the chat, I believe, and someone said, they were just sort of spitballing about how could someone, again, someone sitting just across from you, how could they be getting assistance?
Right.
So he read Anal Beads and laughed, and then I think someone like John Oliver picked it up, or it might have been Trevor Noah, and then it just took on a life of its own from there.
And that element's pretty ridiculous, but what you're saying with the existential threat of cheating in chess, are we talking spy level gear, like microchip level, like small earpieces and like maybe like a camera in the glasses or kind of thing, or
Yeah,
contact?
that's what got me about these accusations, because presumably when Magnus Carlsen accused Hans Niemann implicitly of cheating,
Right.
one would think it was for the game that he beat Carlsen. which again was on full display. He's got, 6 cameras around him, a room full of people. So to me, it's just unimaginable that in that game in particular, he cheated. And then people were going back and looking at all of his previous games. And, I haven't followed him everywhere. I can't say he never took a phone into the bathroom, but they're looking at all these games. Oh, and the other thing was that tournament, he was a last second invitee. So like he was invited a week before. So you're telling me that he set up when I interviewed Grandmaster Jakob Aagaard about this, he said a James Bond type, criminal endeavor. So you're telling me within a week he set up this like elaborate system to cheat in this tournament that he didn't even know he was going to play in. So to me that seemed implausible, but then they went back and looked at all his other games, and they're flagging one of his best results was in Cuba. Like as far as we know, he traveled alone. So like how would he have cheated there? And we don't know what the security measures are like, and also like it just became so far afield because Magnus never spoke specifically about what he was accusing Hans of. Like, are we accusing him of having been an over-the-board cheater in the past? Are we accusing him of cheating in your exact game? Or are we just bringing light to the fact that as Hans has not disputed, he did cheat online in the past? So it's hard to dissect what exactly he was accused of because the principals were so quiet about it.
Yeah, there seems to be some ethical questions around the actual method of accusation, because usually if you accuse somebody, you need to have some form of proof. Have your guests spoken about this subject at all?
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people about it, and it's been funny because a lot of the YouTube people you see, someone like Hikaru, he seems to be vaguely casting aspersions against Hans often when he discusses it, but coming short of explaining exactly how he would have done it, similar to the inferences we're left to draw from Magnus. But maybe there's some selection bias in the people I've interviewed, but I think maybe all of the people I've interviewed, I think of like Grandmaster David Smerdon, who's a PhD economist with a statistical background, said, he doesn't see any evidence. Dr. Kenneth Regan, most respected cheat detection detective in the world, said he combed through the games and doesn't see anything. Someone like Jonathan Rowson, who doesn't have the statistical background that these other people do, but obviously very, very well read and very well informed. I actually have an interview coming out with the aforementioned Kaidanov, who also said he didn't see any evidence. So most of the people that I interviewed, and most of them are not saying that it's impossible that he cheated, but it's just, historically you believe in innocent until proven guilty. And there was just what we've been shown, a few suspicious moves or a few really well played games, to me, fell short of something where someone should be like blacklisted from chess.
Yeah, there was proof though that he cheated on Chess.com's title Tuesday though, right? Or alleged proof, I should say, just in case.
Yeah, well, they published. He didn't dispute it in some papers that he published, and I don't mean to de-emphasize the importance of cheating online. I mean, full stop, you shouldn't do it. But there have been many, many other cases of people cheating online, and no one else got this sort of treatment.
Right, that's true. Okay, let's move on to our final topic, probably one of the toughest topics of the day, which is still a raging scandal right now, the sex abuse scandal in U.S. chess and at the St. Louis Chess Club. Two organizations doing absolutely great things in the chess world, but they seem to have mishandled Shahadi's revelations. Can you comment on? I know you're friends with the Shahadi family, so you don't have to pretend to be unbiased here. What do you think is going on here in these institutions in their response to Shahadi's revelations that Ramirez was abusing women and girls?
Yeah, so both the St. Louis Chess Club and the U.S. Chess Federation their priority seems to have been to distance themselves from responsibility it seems to be an agency problem. No one knows who should be responsible for policing someone's alleged actions. And it seems like as we try to deconstruct, because obviously after my friend Jennifer Shahadi came forward with her own experiences, her own allegations against Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez, more people came forward and she had heard about them. And I had heard about them for years. then more people came forward. But basically, it seems like people are so scared, institutions are so scared
Yeah.
of legal ramifications that my guess is any statement they make, that's their number one priority, rather than standing up for victims and, improving things going forward. So it definitely saddens me. I mean, I'm a big fan of a lot of the work that St. Louis Chess Club and the U.S. Chess Federation has done.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like they've done a lot of fantastic things for promoting women's chess
Yeah.
in particular. The Cairns Cup in St. Louis is a wonderful event that makes a huge difference in the livelihood of some of the best female players in the world. And U.S. Chess, obviously, Jen Shahade has been a big part of this. And as we
Yeah.
record, the news just broke that she will be leaving U.S. Chess, which is quite unfortunate.
Right.
But U.S. Chess Women has done a fantastic job helping support girls who play chess at the scholastic level and providing role models and putting on events. So I do think that their hearts are in the right place, but their actions speak louder than words. And I just feel like the advice they've been given, likely, in my personal opinion, is so targeted on avoiding legal liability
Right.
that they're losing sight of the big picture of the humans involved in this story, which creates longer term issues for sort of the general environment for making sure something like this doesn't happen again.
Yeah. Yeah. And but yeah, I mean, there's not really that much more to go there, but I want to leave it on a more positive note because women in chess has the chess scene for women has exploded over the last 20, 30 years, coming from a predominantly male dominated game and with a lot of sexism and chauvinism. What guests have you interviewed that have kind of broken the mold here and have really pushed against that? Obviously Shahade, but
Yeah, obviously, I'm old friends with Jennifer Shahade, and she's been on the podcast many times. I've recently interviewed Anna Zatansky, who's an example of someone who in an incredible story, won the Cairns Cup after rededicating herself to chess. I've interviewed Judith Polgar, of course, the original trailblazer, and these allegations, I have to say, and I have asked people, like, when I interview women, which I probably could interview more. You always feel like you should be doing more. I should be doing more to help women make sure that chess is a welcoming environment. But I do ask often. I try to sort of dance around it sometimes, but I try to ask, like, do you feel welcome when you play at a chess tournament? And it could just be that it's not the right forum for them to speak out, because often they will say, by and large, they do feel welcome. I did interview Tallulah Roberts, who's a big Twitch streamer who emerged in the past couple of years. And if memory serves, so unfortunately, she just got into chess during the Queen's Gambit boom, and then went and played in the Reykjavik Open, and unfortunately had some sort of harassment take place that, to her great credit, she came forward about. And if memory serves, it had happened previously by the time we interviewed, but I think we did discuss it. I've certainly seen her discuss it. But yeah, I mean, it's sad, but unfortunately, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So I certainly welcome hearing the stories, and have made inquiries about, in some of these cases, about talking to people. But often in these situations, getting back to what we were saying about sort of being worried about legal ramifications, you want to sort of say what you want to say in a very controlled environment rather than in a sort of a free-flowing one. But obviously, I stand with all the victims, and it's terrible what they've had to endure. And again, just hope that by more people bringing it to light, that the stuff stops happening.
That we can root it out from the chess world. I echo your sentiment, and I stand with the victims as well. And I hope that anybody that wants to talk about it in the light of public will come forward and talk in a way that is comfortable for them, because obviously it's really challenging thing for women to do. You can see how Shahade has been attacked, and I've heard that other women, even just the women that resigned from the accessibility committee at US Chess, they've been attacked as well. So hopefully, people like us can provide a safe space for people to talk about it. Okay. Let me just double check that you don't have anything more to say on that subject before I wrap up.
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for talking about it. I know it's a tough and depressing subject to talk about. But to finish on a note about you and Perpetual Chess Podcast, who do you want to interview the most that you haven't interviewed already?
Yeah, I do get that question a lot, and obviously I have not interviewed Magnus Carlsen, so people mention him
Oh,
frequently.
oh my
And
gosh! What is
yeah,
Magnus doing?
yeah, certainly I wouldn't mind interviewing him. I do have an affinity for some of the older school legends as well. Someone like Dr. John Nunn, I'm sure, has like an amazing array of stories, and I do like the people who've done different things. Like he's written some incredible books in addition to mathematician, and in addition to his rich career. I would love to, I actually just sent an email today, so we'll see, but I would love to interview Sophia Polgar, because obviously Judith is, one of our great ambassadors, and Sophia as well is quite active on social media. And even though they don't compete anymore, they still very much seem a part of the chess world.
Right.
But Sophia Polgar actually walked away from the chess world, but she actually recently, like this, in the past couple of months, is out with a book looking back at her chess career and also sharing her art. So I feel like someone like that might have a fascinating story to tell as well. But I mean, often it's not necessarily the biggest names that have the best stories to tell. I've noticed in my years doing the show. So there are plenty of people I would like name off the top of my head, but it could be anyone who gives the most compelling interview.
Excellent. Well, I don't want to take too much more of your time, so let's wrap up, because there's a million subjects we talk about. We didn't even get to talk about the crossover of poker, chess as a sport. There's just so many topics that we can talk about. But I think this is a good place to leave it for today, and I want to wish you luck with your continued success for Perpetual Chess Podcast and your Chessable course you're working on. Any for YouTube, any other projects that you want to plug, or even just those projects?
Mainly those. Certainly if you're still watching this, at this point on YouTube, you might be interested in the Perpetual Chess Podcast,
Right.
which is pretty easy to find on YouTube and Spotify. And I do have a book coming out November 1st called Perpetual Chess Improvement. So if you're working on your game, keep an eye out for that. It's kind of it touched on some of the stuff we were talking about, like neural networks. But I do try to weave in some stories, even though it's predominantly about sort of how adults go, like sort of the best advice that's been shared about how adults can approach getting better at chess.
Well, excellent. Say the title one more time.
It's called Perpetual Chess Improvement. Should be coming November 1st.
Excellent. November 1st. Look for it, everybody. This is Dylan Quersha, Coach Q, your guide. Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. It's been National Master Ben Johnson here, the brains behind the Perpetual Chess Podcast and the voice behind that as well. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. Great to chat. Goodbye, everyone.